This is the one you've all been waiting for. Those Premier League predictions reviewed. And boy, are we rubbish at predicting the Premier League. This is Talk of the Trinity.
That some have aged better than others, shall we say. But a man who just gets better with age is my co-host, as always, Mr. Trinity himself, Will Forrest. I am still Baz Barrett, although after this episode, going through some of my predictions, I may be changing my name. But one thing that is not going to change is the fact that you can keep up to date with all of the latest Villa news, reviews, previews, polls, anything to do with the goings on at B6 on our Twitter page at Talk Trinity. You can also reminisce with episodes past on our YouTube channel, Talk of the Trinity, or an audio version is ready on numerous hosting platforms: Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google. We are also on FanHub. So without further ado, we are going to go through the Premier League season that has just gone and a light-hearted look back at some of our predictions and see how they fared under the test of time. But we will start with a prediction that we did get right, because we're going to go from top to bottom in the Premier League table, amble our way down like a nice summer's walk. We both predicted at the start of the season that Man City would win the league. When we did our mid-season take two in terms of predictions, the question had moved on slightly in terms of who's going to win the league. It was more, will the team who came first or the team who came second, will they win the league? It was really between those two teams at that point. But we both stuck to our guns and both predicted the winners of the Premier League, Man City. They also won a couple of other trophies you may have heard, culminating in their night in Istanbul, winning the Champions League against Inter Milan. Much to say, Will, in terms of, we called it, in terms of sometimes football can be a simple game in terms of the team with the best players, best manager, won the trophies. Is it as simple as that?
I think it is, to be honest with you. I think the most impressive thing that Man City have done is managed to get Jack Grealish onto England duty against Malta, despite the copious volumes of alcohol that he's had, especially when you hear that Ruben Dias got involved and threw up in Jack Grealish's mum's handbag. I don't know about you because I haven't got your predictions in front of me. I thought Man City would get more points than they did. I thought they breached the 90 barrier with 92. 89, it was a canter for them in the end, wasn't it, really? I think they were always going to win it when Arsenal started to stumble.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of Man City's history over the last few years, if there was one team in the league who you knew would be capable of going on a winning run and being able to maintain that for a considerable period of games, that was Man City. And as you mentioned, that's ultimately what happens when things got tight down the home straight. Arsenal, couple of results went against them. City kept winning. Pressure told really in the end on Arsenal, and Man City just carried on doing what they were doing and what they have done for a number of years. And in the Champions League, they made their moments really in the semi-final, which is often the way it is in terms of the semi-final is often the bigger game than the final. But the way they dismantled Real Madrid, kind of eased their way into the treble winning team that they were and cemented, if it even needed cementing beforehand, cemented Guardiola's legacy in the pantheon of managerial greats. My lawyers tell me that we cannot mention 115 charges, but if we are looking at the football side of things, yeah, fairly straightforward really for City. And the question really becomes, they've won 5 titles in 6 years. Is it? And we will answer the question formally in our preview episode, which will come in a few months' time. Can anybody stop City while Guardiola stays in charge? Is it going to be the same? Again, you'd anticipate the teams who are in the chasing pack are looking at that Man City end of season run and thinking there's a long way to go in terms of trying to catch them. But congratulations to City. They won the league. Congratulations to us because we picked it. We will see how... That is probably one of the giddying highs of our prediction trail, as we'll come on to very, very quickly. In terms of second place in the final table was Arsenal. Neither of us predicted Arsenal to come second at the start of the season, although we did both have Arsenal in the top 4. Fourth, I think we both had Arsenal before the start of the season. It came to the question during our mid-season review, would it be Arsenal or Man City who would win the league? Even when Arsenal, I think they were 9 clear when we recorded our preview, we still thought Arsenal would come second, and that is the way it panned out. So in terms of Man City, we're mentioning the domination is potentially going to last as long as Guardiola decides he wants to stick around. For Arsenal, is the second place finish this season, was that the one chance and you blew it type situation? Do you think they are going to come again? There have been, as you mentioned we were talking off air, rumours of Arteta potentially going to PSG. What do you think of those rumours? Do you think there's any likelihood that Arteta would jump ship at this stage, or do you think he's going to stick around for a while further at Arsenal to try and break that gap between them and Man City?
To be honest with you, I'm not too sure. I mean, he's obviously got an affinity with Arsenal because he was there in his playing days, and he went back to Arsenal when he was a coach at Man City, when he could have just kept it easy, could have waited for a better job than Arsenal to come up. Because let's be honest, Arsenal they haven't really been threatening the title race for quite a while now. I think when you look at them, if I was Arteta, I'd seriously consider PSG, but it's a bit of a circus at the moment with all of the Mbappe stuff. So if he was to stay at Arsenal, I think that this is the best that they get. I think, last season, you go down to Sainsbury's, you look in the car park, and you've got the aluminium container, you've got the paper container, you've got the old clothes containers, then you've got the Arsenal container because of the bottle job that they did. I just don't see it getting better for them unless they bring in reinforcements. I don't think they've got a strong enough squad, for one. I think that they need to add a Declan Rice, and they need better backup players for when the likes of William Saliba get injured. I think that was a key moment in their season. But I also think that they've got a lot of players who aren't mentally tough enough to win those matches when it gets to that point. Might be a bit controversial, but Zinchenko, I don't think he's the type of player, despite playing for Man City and winning leagues with them, he was never the first choice left back, really. He's gone to Arsenal. They were hoping that he'd be able to carry them over the line in those sorts of moments, and he didn't. I don't see it getting any better for them, and I don't see them finishing any higher than second next year. In fact, I don't see them finishing second next year.
Well, we'll see if that opinion has changed by the time we do the prediction episode in a couple of months' time. Because as you say, I think the summer recruitment is key for Arsenal. They are linked with Declan Rice. I think there's been some initial lowball offers made from Arsenal side on the understanding that Declan Rice does want to leave West Ham. So trying to get a cheaper deal, which won't happen, and West Ham will hold out for what they considered the appropriate price. In terms of Arteta to PSG, I don't see it happening. And from Arteta's perspective, as you mentioned, I don't think it's a good time to be going to PSG. The breaking up of the Fab Three up front, which was meant to deliver the Champions League and didn't. So there's a bit of a rebuilding situation going on at PSG, even though they have won the league for about 85 years in a row since they had the takeover. But still, well, funny enough, I should say there's a couple of other French teams that have won the league in the last few years. Is Bayern have won their league 85 years in a row. But I don't think now's the time to go to PSG. I think in terms of Arteta at Arsenal, good fit. He should want to see this job through the fruition. I mean, as you alluded to there, well, more than alluded, two-footed there in terms of there are question marks about the mentality of Arsenal players. I think the pre-season talk coaching is going to be very much along the lines of go and show these people wrong. But it is in terms of finishers, and it's one of those situations you get experience of finishing by finishing, but you don't get the experience until you finish. So I think in terms of Arsenal next season, a couple of more experienced heads in there definitely help. Declan Rice would be a good signing. Do I think Declan Rice on his own will win Arsenal the league? No. But, I think they're kind of the big moves Arsenal are going to have to make to have any chance of breaking the City hold on the title. But on the plus side for them, it was higher than we thought they were going to come. So they've exceeded expectations from the start of the season. So well done for them. Speaking of a team who did not exceed our pre-season predictions, in third place in the Premier League table in real life was Manchester United. We both predicted Spurs to come third. That aged badly, although they were in the Champions League places as of the start of April. So an absolutely colossus collapsing job from them. When we both had another go, we both had United third. When we had on second bite at the proverbial cherry, before the start of the season, neither of us had United in the top four. So we got it right second time for United. And they won the League Cup as well, lost to City in the FA Cup final. Do you think that this is the start of a period at Old Trafford whereby they may be Man City's closest rivals for the league title and other trophies? Or do you think it's a bit similar to the time under Jose Mourinho where Man United came second in the league and it led on to absolutely nothing, really, in terms of trying to challenge for those trophies? Well, what are you feeling on Man United?
Well, that was Jose Mourinho's greatest achievement, wasn't it? He said, finishing second with that Man United team. I'm very much of the opinion, and I said it at the start of the season, I think, if I didn't, I'm rewriting history, that I think that Ten Hag would be a good fit for them and that he will get things right in the end. And he's shown that he's getting Man United in the right direction. Yes, they had the freak result at Liverpool. Yes, they need to do a lot better away from home against the top teams because they were dreadful against those. But I think we've seen enough from them to show that they could be the challenger for Man City. Man City are the Tyson Fury of the Premier League. And every now and again, there's going to be a different challenger stepping up, a Deontay Wilder, and Anthony Joshua, though that'll be a team that never actually does quite challenge. And other boxers that I don't know the names of. And I think it could be Man United's turn next year. I think it could be Man United and maybe one or two other teams that are running Man City close. But to really, really, really have any chance of winning the Premier League, Manchester United need to bring in a proper striker and they need to bring in another midfielder to play alongside Bruno Fernandes and in front of Casemiro. And I mean, it's surprising that Declan Rice hasn't been linked with Manchester United very much. I think he would be a very good fit for their midfield, great driving midfielder. And they've got the money to spend. They've got the 100 and whatever million. And then up front, it's been said for a couple of seasons now that Harry Kane is their target. And I think if you've got a Harry Kane up front and you can play Rashford, Garnacho, Sancho, Anthony around him, then they'd be flying up the top of the league. The defence, again, would be a bit of a worry. They don't know what's happening with David De Gea as things currently stand. But yeah, I see this as the start for Manchester United, and I see it as the start of a glory period of somewhat, not necessarily winning the league like they were doing under Ferguson, but definitely winning cup competitions and getting to the latter round of European Cup competitions, which is it's what we grew up with, wasn't it, in the 90s, Manchester United dominating. But yeah, Ten Hag's got it. He's going to be the one to turn them round and get them challenging again. What about you? Do you think that Manchester will be red next season, or do you think it's a bit of a season where Manchester United have benefited because of the lacklustre efforts of the likes of Liverpool and Tottenham and Chelsea?
I think it's more the latter. Although, in the positive side for Man United, as you mentioned, I think they've got a very good manager. I think they are trying to build an identity out of style of play at United, which they haven't had for a number of years, really, since Fergie left, you could argue. But I think in terms of, as of the time we record, obviously before the transfer window has gone into full swing, they are, in my view, at least 5 players short through the spine of the team to be really on that top pinnacle of challengers. I mean, you've mentioned De Gea in terms of the goalie, not at that top level. I mean, in terms of the Man City, Ederson. I mean, we haven't talked about Liverpool yet. Alisson, Martinez at Villa, of course. There's the upper tier of goalkeepers. De Gea has been on the way down for a number of years. I mean, he's still on the way down to try and save that second goal in the cup final, depending on how slow he got down for that. You wouldn't even put De Gea in maybe episode for a future time, a list of the top goalies in the Premier League. I don't know if you'd even put him top 10 off the top of my head. So they need.
That's a big shout.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of just throwing a few very quick, just random goalies out the air in terms of who might be better. Jose Sarr at Wolves, I'd say, is better. In terms of, if I was really going on full troll mode, I would say that Pickford's better than him. England Pickford, absolutely 100%. Then you got Raya at Brentford, you'd probably say is better. So Nick Pope, I'd say definitely better. So, yeah, I won't go through all the goalies, but that's at least 7. I think I've just gone through, which I'd say were better than De Gea. So they need a new goalie, new centre back. Their defence was better this season than it has been, but a centre back partnership with Lindelof and Martinez, is that really going to win you championship games? Not quite. Centre midfield, as you mentioned, they need somebody else to play along with Fernandes, because in terms of their backups, really, McTominay, Fred, is that a championship winning midfield? Not really. And then, as you mentioned, they need a centre forward. The sight of having to bring on Wout Weghorst off the bench, to try and get him an equaliser in the cup final, they're short up there as well. So I think there's massive rebuild. We're not rebuilding. They remind me of Arsenal a few years ago under Arteta when he came in, and they didn't qualify for the Champions League for the first couple of seasons. Took them a while to build it up. United obviously have qualified for the Champions League, so they are further ahead in that regard. But yeah, in terms of challenging for City, I think their summer recruitment, if they get 3 or 4 players in those positions, then yes. You mentioned Harry Kane. If United sign Harry Kane, that automatically elevates them into a conversation of, do I think they'll repeat top three with Harry Kane? Quite possibly, because as we'll probably come on to later in terms of when we talk about Golden Boot, for somebody who apparently did nothing this season and still scored 30 goals by doing nothing, he's with personal opinions about him aside, he's a great goal scorer in the Premier League. So United will be much better with him. So I think it's a big summer for United. I think we both predicted them not even to come in the top four. So in that sense, they overachieved. But they have got that cornerstone piece of an identity and a manager, the right manager in place. So yeah, I don't see them sliding significantly like a Chelsea, who we'll come on to in a bit. But yeah, I think they're a way away from competing with Man City. But cup competition, they've won the League Cup. You can beat a team on the day. But moving on to the team who they beat in their cup win this season in the League Cup, Newcastle United, who came fourth. They lost the equal least amount of games in the Premier League this season, only losing 5. They also drew the equal most games in the Premier League this season with 14, along with Brentford. In terms of our predictions, this is the first one you'd say in terms of dicey, in terms of one of our pre-season predictions. You had them 8th. I had them in the bottom half, which isn't great. When we had our second go at doing the predictions, I had them 4th, which is where they came, and you had them 5th on the same points as the team you had coming 4th. So you had them there or thereabouts. So Newcastle 4th, ahead of the curve, you would say, in terms of qualifying for the Champions League. Where do you see this season being in terms of the evolution of Newcastle? Do you think it is going to be a situation where we look at them competing with Man City in a few years, or is this going to be the giddying high for Newcastle back in the Champions League?
I don't even think Newcastle have to wait a few years, to be honest with you. I think next season we see a show of intent from Newcastle. I mean, their owners haven't exactly been cautious with their money. When you look at 70 million, Alexander Isak, and some of the other players that they've brought in during their tenure, and since Eddie Howe's been there. But I think that them finishing 4th on 71 points and getting Champions League football could be the red rag to the bull that makes them think, actually, you know what, with even more investment in getting in a proper left back, getting in a better central midfield partner or two for Bruno Guimaraes, despite how well Joe Linton did, and having somebody who's younger than a very, very good Callum Wilson up front that can bang in goals for them, and still have Wilson coming off the bench because he's going to want to play Champions League football at his age. I think that we could see Newcastle doing much better next season and then really being in the question going into the latter months of the season as to they couldn't, could they, in regards to winning the Premier League. They've got to be favourites for trophies, if they're spending the money, and the links that they've had recently with Barella of Inter Milan, amongst some of the other ones, just shows the intent that they've got to want to break into those upper echelons of not only domestic football but also European football. So I think this is just the beginning for Newcastle United. I think we're going to see them soaring near a lot closer points wise to Man City than the 18 that they were behind them this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of for Newcastle, their recruitment has been very good to date, and and that now being in the Champions League is going to enable them to attract the next level of player up. There's already been talk in terms of the Inter Milan in the Joys of Live broadcasting. I forgot his name. I think his name begins with B. He played centre midfield. Yeah, he played centre midfield for them. That's the, I thought Inter, not that it matters because Man City won. I thought Inter were a better team in that, and he was integral to that. So being able to move that next level of recruitment is only going to strengthen their position. And how long Eddie Howe is around, I think that is going to be an interesting conversation in terms of, I think the pressure is going to be on Newcastle, on Eddie Howe in particular, to have a good start to the season, challenging for those Champions League places early on to quieten the rumour mill in terms of, because there was always the feeling that he was the guy before the guy, but he turned out to be a better guy than perhaps people gave him credit for. So there is going to be, that continuing pressure on him. But yeah, I think Newcastle are going to be there challenging for those European places for a while to come, which is good news for us because, as we showed in April, we can smash them. So, if we can beat one of our rivals, that's good. Though, in the perils of live recording, I just mentioned one. I just mentioned another in terms of the table that I was going after for my predictions for the mid-season. I've realised I was looking at one that I did earlier rather than the one I actually talked about on air. So when we did that episode, so I was thinking, I did well to predict Newcastle fourth, but I'm sure I didn't. And then I've looked at it, realised I was looking at the wrong table, and I actually had Newcastle to come fifth because I had Liverpool fourth when we did it again in mid-season, because it was one of the first. It's the first one we'll talk about today of the honourable mentions in terms of the predictions that we made in that mid-season show, which got laughed at, but ultimately proved wrong, but very, very nearly coming true. And this was the one I said Liverpool would come fourth. You laughed me out the room. When they went on their 7-match winning streak, there was probably a slight worrying feeling from your side of the fence, thinking, "Oh God, they're not going to, are they?" Liverpool. They just about didn't. But for, a brief hot moment, it looked like I may actually have made a right prediction, but I didn't. And it was Liverpool and Newcastle who came the other way round, because it was Liverpool who came fifth in the eventual end of the season table. Before the season started, in our pre-season predictions, you had Man United fifth. I had Chelsea fifth. So Chelsea falls into the category of spectacularly wrong in terms of that prediction. When we did it again, as I mentioned, you had Newcastle fifth because you had Brighton fourth. And when we did it again, I had Newcastle fifth because I had Liverpool fourth. So Newcastle, Liverpool, close. In terms of Liverpool, as I said, they went on a streak at the end of the season, very nearly got into Champions League. Do you think that is going to be the precursor for them taking their place back amongst the elite next season in that Champions League qualification? Or do you think that this, from what you saw near the end of the season of Liverpool, that this is going to be the start of a gradual decline for Liverpool, and that the so-called second-tier European competitions are where you're going to expect them to end in terms of Premier League finishes?
Well, first of all, I think with the whole Liverpool thing, fair play, because they very nearly did come fourth. And it's ironic that I laughed you out of the room when we were sat in your living room and you had to go and stand outside the front door for a little while until I stopped.
Yep, it was raining, it was cold.
The great thing about it, though, was that when I needed somebody to step up and just put a halt to Liverpool's top four aspirations, it was Super Unai Emery who came along and did that for us. Liverpool, looking at their business so far, they've got rid of a little bit of deadwood, haven't they? In Firmino, in Milner, in Oxlade-Chamberlain. And I mean that nicely. But there were players that they needed to get rid of so that they could start to build on that. They paid allegedly 35 million for Alexis McAllister, who was one of the best midfielders in the Premier League and the World Cup last year. You know, he was pretty much man of the match in the World Cup final, arguably. I honestly think that even though they didn't really have, from what I can remember, any massive games towards the end of the season, apart from us and apart from Arsenal at home, and they did very well against Arsenal at home, and they did well to get a draw against us as well. I think that Klopp's identified that he needs to rebuild that midfield because of aging legs, and I wouldn't be surprised to see one of Fabinho or Henderson leave. And I think that with McAllister coming in, there's talks of Thuram and Kone, other midfielders coming in as well. I think that we're going to see a solid Liverpool who have another slow start to the season, not as slow as they were this year, because as you mentioned, they didn't really start to step it up until the last 7 games. I think it'll be a lot quicker than that they start to find their form. And I've said this pretty much about every team so far, except for Arsenal. I think Liverpool again could be one of those teams who make life more difficult for Manchester City next year, and they'll be in that mixer looking for second place, if not first. I mean, every team should be going for first, shouldn't they? No point in being in the league otherwise. But I think that they'll be one of those teams who you think, yep, they could be there or thereabouts, to coin a Steve Bruce phrase. And I think in regards to Europe, they've got an excellent chance of winning the Europa League next season. We'll get onto that when we do our predictions in a couple of months. But, you know, Liverpool, they've got to give themselves credit. They turned it around in the end. They got a lot of good wins. You saw that coming. And they finished in a respectable position, though we both thought they were going to come second at the start of the season. So not as good as you thought, was it?
Not at the start of the season. I think we were both thinking they would do a lot more. They had a bad start and weren't really able to recover, even despite the fact that they beat Man United 7-0, did they, at Anfield? So, they were in a situation whereby, you know, they were trying to frantically rush at the end of the season to try and get fourth. Didn't quite work out. I agree with you. The midfield is the key component for them to rebuild. McAllister, excellent signing. If they get a couple more in, because I think I mentioned in previous episodes, I don't think their defense is as bad as people say it is. And their front line, I think they've got enough young talent in there to play a supporting role alongside Salah, the mainstay. So I think Liverpool will be better next season. Will the competition rise to match them as well? We'll have to wait and see. And in terms of one of the teams who were in competition with them for a European spot this season, 6th place, Brighton. Preseason predictions, neither of us had Brighton in the top half. when we did it again near the end of the season, you had Brighton 4th, qualifying for Champions League. I had them 6th, which is where they came. So for Brighton, is it a simple question of the show must go on, losing players like McAllister, or do you see this as being the pinnacle?
I think that they lose McAllister. They have lost him, and I think they lose Caicedo. I'd be worried about some of the other players over the next couple of seasons as well. For me, Brighton we've selling those big players, and we know that they can recruit really well. But with having Europe also, and now having that level of expectation because of the Zebra, I think that this is probably higher than they're going to finish for the next season, though they could do very well in the Europa. I don't see them being one of the teams that could break into the Sky Six and sit there amongst that monopoly of clubs. Though, I tell you what, if there was any team that I want to prove me wrong that wasn't Aston Villa, it would be Brighton. Really like great style of play, great manager, great podcast as well, as we know, friend of the show, Joe. But I think that this is probably the pinnacle for the time being.
Yeah, I agree. Their European adventure is going to be a key component for them next season. If they keep Matoma, he's a big player for them. As you mentioned, McAllister's gone. Maybe Casiado is going to go as well. But if they keep Matoma, bring in a couple of other players on that conveyor belt of talent that they are able to identify from the scouting team, we'll do the predictions in a couple of months, but they're a very good team, as you say. Guardiola says that he learned stuff off their manager, De Zerbi, so demonstrating what a talent he is. And watching them play at Villa Park on the last day when they had nothing to play for and probably rotated a few players as well from their usual starting lineup, and they still look pretty good against us. I don't think they're going to drop off a cliff next season, but European football may take an increasing priority in their season as it goes on. And hopefully, from their perspective, they will be able to go on a run down the gauntlet. And I mentioned in terms of that last game of the season with Aston Villa winning to cement their place in 7th in the table at the start of the season. You predicted Villa to come 7th, so kudos to you. You got that right. I had West Ham to come 7th, so no kudos for me. When we did it again near the end of the season, we both had Spurs 7th, so absolutely no credit for either of us when we had another go. We did talk about the Villa season just gone in our season review episode that we released. Well, depending when you're listening to this, it was the episode before this one. So go and check it out on our back catalogue. Fair to say, you predicted Villa to come 7th. We came 7th, but absolutely no idea about how we did it, how the season would unfold based on our hopes on that first game of the season. But, your optimism proved to be, your initial optimism proved to be misplaced, but your faith in Villa coming 7th came to a beautiful fruition at the end of the season.
Mate, I'm disappointed in myself for 2 reasons. One, that I only put us to come 7th at the start of the season, and 2, that I thought we'd come 10th in the middle of the season. Now we can scrap that. That's a bag of poo. It all comes down to one person, doesn't it? Really, and that's Super Unai Emery. We've waxed lyrical over him. We've seen that other, broadcasters and whatnot, pundits have waxed lyrical over him as well. He's done a fantastic job. And when you think that he took over with us 4th bottom on goal difference, we were outside the relegation zone. And in 7 months, he hasn't even got us kicking and screaming up into 7th. He's got us slickly and patiently moving up to 7th, because there was a long time when we were 11th and it felt like we were never going to get any higher than that. And suddenly we shot right up, and they were talking about us for Champions League and whatnot. So, I think it's when you look at the reasons why we said we'd come 7th, and I'm not going to go through them. Go back and listen to the pre-season predictions. It's stark contrast to the reasons as to why we finished 7th in the end. We looked like an incredible team at the end. The form that we had was fantastic as well. And I can't wait to predict where we're going to come next season, because I know I've mentioned a few challenges for Manchester City, but we've got Stone Cold Steve Austin right here coming for Tyson Fury. Let me tell you. And that's the bottom line.
Yep. And I think in terms of the one thing that was constant through the season when we made our first predictions was the players. We always thought we had good players. And with Unai Emery, we managed to find a manager who could unlock them and let them play to their best ability. So, as Will says, go and listen to our previous episodes to hear us wax lyrical about Unai Emery. But in terms of a team we are not going to wax lyrical about is the team who came 8th in the Premier League at the end of the season, Spurs. At the start of the season, I had Villa 8th. somehow. So in terms of, I wasn't too far off. You had Newcastle 8th at the start of the season. Obviously, they came higher. When we rolled it back again for our mid-season predictions, you had Brentford 8th, and I had Brentford 8th. So in terms of where Brentford came, you won't have to wait too long to hear about them. We both had Spurs 7th, so we weren't too far off. But I think in terms of, for a team of the season with the biggest collapse, I think you'd have to say Spurs, wouldn't you? I mean, they're in the Champions League places at the start of April and then just absolutely fell off a proverbial cliff. And when we played them near the end of the season, I just almost out of nowhere, because we were paying attention. I was looking at that team thinking, Jesus Christ, these are not very good at all. And they're in the Champions League a month previous to that. So at time of recording, they haven't. They've just hired Big Ange, the Celtic manager, to take over. He's got a job on his hands, hasn't he? To get Spurs back towards European qualification.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, the fact that they were 13 points clear of us at one point, and yet we finished above them, was amazing. And I love the fact that they had to win and score a load of goals and hope that we lost. And, you know, they won, scored a load of goals, and yet we still won and finished above them. You know, Spurs, I tell you what I think's happened to them this season. I reckon Antonio Conte has had a listen with Heung-min Son at the start of the season to our podcast and gone, third, we'll show you. And they've just hit the self-destruct button, because if I remember rightly, you tipped Heung-min Son for the Golden Boot at the start of the season, and understandably so. He's had some amazing seasons for Spurs, but this year...
Yeah. I mean, you won it the previous season, which is kind of where I was going, because I think in terms of, we'll mention the Golden Boot because you mentioned it. Haaland won the Golden Boot, obviously. You picked Haaland to win the Golden Boot. I think in terms of our pre-season, we both said Haaland will be a cheat code, really, in terms of Man City and goals. I wanted to go somewhere a little different to the obvious, so I went for Son. And this is why sometimes you just go for the sensible answer, because then you don't look like an idiot when you've got it completely wrong. But for Spurs, yeah, it was almost quite, well, it was quite funny kind of at the end of the season. As you mentioned, they were miles ahead of us at one point. I think they got a big job on their hands, and, you know, we'll have to see when we do the preview episode for next season, because we've never learned either, because we'll be doing another preview episode. We'll see how their summer recruitment has gone and where we think that will change. But yeah, 8th, and, you know, in terms of, they were lucky to come 8th almost by the end, because in terms of the team who came 9th behind them by 1 point was Brentford. Our pre-season predictions, we both had Brentford bottom half. I think we both had them 17th, I think. So that was a swing and a miss from us both. When we did it again, we did correct ourselves, because we had them coming 8th when we did it again. So we had learnt our mistake by that time. But Brentford very much only lost 9 games in the Premier League in the season last gone, which was less than Spurs, Villa and Brighton. A lot of draws, ultimately, 14 draws. Just going about their business in the right way, under the radar. They're the team everybody would be talking about if Brighton didn't exist, basically. So I think for Brentford, job well done. Even when they lost Tony near the end of the season, they still won in terms of won the last 3 games of the season. Beat Spurs, everybody did, but they beat Man City last day of the season. I think it'll quite suit them, Brighton taking all the headlines for Brentford, but doesn't detract from a very, very good season from a Brentford perspective. And we probably won't be underestimating them again next season.
No, I don't think so. Thomas Frank's done a fantastic job there. I know that you're a massive fan of him from when we've spoken about the next Villa manager a couple of times over the last season or two. And to think that they did so well without Tony. And in some ways, it's similar to the Mitrovic not being able to play for Fulham. I think that Brentford, like Fulham, probably felt a bit hard done by with the suspensions that Tony and Mitrovic both got. And because of that, it added fuel to the fire to help galvanise them to win those games. Whereas if it had just been, say, a red card for Tony for two bookable offences and he was out for 3 matches, I don't know how much that would have galvanised them so much, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But they were brilliant. And despite being in the same boat as many of these other teams in the fact that they had a massive head start over us because of Gerrard, Brentford really exceeded expectations. They got to be, or they should have been spoken about as the team of the season, or definitely one of the team of the seasons, because in their second year here, where most teams would struggle, you look back at Ipswich Town, for example, all those years ago. Brentford didn't. They consolidated. They got up to 9th. They brought in new players. They didn't necessarily play those new players, so that might help them a bit more next year with those players being acclimatised, like Damsgaard, for example, and Hickey. They've got the foundations of a very good team there, Brentford have, and teams like us, Brighton and Newcastle being in Europe might play into their hands.
Yep, very possibly so. And if they can replace Tony's goals, then yeah, they will be a team to look out for. To double down, just to recap, in terms of the predictions, who we both thought would come 9th before the start of the season, you said West Ham and I said Wolves. So another swing and a miss there. And speaking of another swing and a miss, the team who came 10th in the Premier League was Fulham. Preseason, we both had Fulham to go down.
Yeah.
And that obviously ended up being a pretty terrible prediction from us both. You did predict Mitrovic to score double figures, which he did. I think he scored 11 at the end of the season. And once he got those goals, he promptly decided to go and get himself banned for 8 games at the end of the season, just reaffirming he didn't need to do it anymore. We both had Palace 10th, which we'll come on to. We weren't far off. But when we, again, at the halfway stage, when we got to do it again, I did have Fulham coming 10th when we did our mid-season predictions, and you had Villa coming 10th. So Fulham proved us wrong, stayed up, got on the beach in March, picked up, they got a couple of wins near the end of the season just to, well, they were 7 points off 9th and 7 points off 11th. So they were in their own little island in 10th, but 52 points. Very good job for Fulham. Mauro Silva rehabilitating his reputation during the course of the season. Can't really argue, really, in terms of Fulham. They did what they needed to do and what esteemed pundits and us perhaps didn't think they would.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They've had another fantastic season, haven't they? First season back, nobody saw them reliving the heights of Steve Malbranc and Louis Sahar up front for them when they were getting into the top half of the Premier League. And they've done remarkably well to come 10th, despite Mitrovic's 8-match ban. And speaking about him, he scored another 2 after he came back from his 8-match ban. He had a great season. But as I say, I think that they probably felt hard done by with him having as long as he did, even though he was deserved. And it helped them with results when they could have fallen off a bit of a cliff. Silva did a brilliant job. Both Silva and Fulham should be in the conversation, or should have been in the conversation for, best of their in the categories that they are. Fulham will be interesting next season to see whether teams have sussed them out and to see if they can recapture the form they had this year. I mean, Andreas Pereira was a fantastic buy, and Paulinia was another very, very good buy, but the latter has been linked with other clubs, linked with West Ham as a replacement for Declan Rice. It'll be interesting to keep a close eye on Fulham come the end of the season and see if they can get into the top 10 again, and to see if Mitrovic can get double figures again next season as well.
Yep, I may not be quite so foolhardy in making the Mitrovic bet next season, but yeah, certainly a few players to keep an eye on at Fulham. So delving into the bottom half of the final table now, Palace came 11th, as I mentioned a little while ago, we both had Palace to come 10th at the start of the season, so not too far away. In terms of who we predicted to have 11th before the start of the season, you had Wolves, and I think I had Newcastle. So, yeah, varying degrees of success there. When we rolled it back, I had Villa 11th when we did the mid-season, and when we did it again, you did have Palace 11th when you did that mid-season. But the Palace season will be summed up by the honourable mention number 2. In terms of when we did that mid-season prediction, you said that Palace would get 20 points in the running after they'd appointed Roy Hodgson.
Yeah.
I laughed you out the room. They did come very close in terms of they just fell short. I think they ended up with 17 or 18, but still a very good run. Yeah, so close, but yeah, so very honourable mention. They had I'll throw it out there. They had a very, very favourable fixture list at the end of the season where they got those wins. Do you think they came roughly where we thought they would come? And they ended, with that run. More the same again for them. I mean, I think in terms of Vieira got sacked after they went on a bad run where they played a lot of big teams. And even though they ended the season with that run of wins under Roy Hodgson, do you think they're actually worse off having pushed the button on getting rid of Vieira when they did? Or was there really no choice for Palace at that time?
I think because of the way that he tried to change the style of play and the results that they were getting and the lack of goals, it made sense to pull the trigger at that time, because otherwise they'd have really been in a relegation scrap. Now, there's been talk about them rehiring Vieira. Whether they will or not, I don't know. I mean, that would be a massive shock. Roy Hodgson coming in and doing Roy Hodgson things was a shock as well, considering he retired from football after his ill-fated spell at Watford. With Palace, really, I think that they are very much a mid-table established Premier League team. The Wilfried Zaha situation could massively affect them next year. If he leaves, it will massively affect them if they don't bring in a goal scorer. But if they do bring in a goal scorer, even though you probably say that Wilfried Zaha isn't an out-and-out scorer, I know he gets about 10 or 12 a season. I think that if they can get someone in to score goals, and with the likes of Eberechi Eze, who made his England debut just the other night, and Michael Elise, they'll be absolutely fine. I think that we'll see. And they brought in Jefferson Lerma as well, who's a solid signing on a free transfer. I think they'll be fine. I think they'll get their mid-table again. But the worry would be that if Eze and Elise continue on the path that they are, that the big clubs are going to come circling, and they'll spend the money and they'll turn their heads, and get them hoping for European football with one of those top 6 teams. What about you? Do you think that Palace will be okay next season, or do you think that they've overachieved this season with their fantastic 18 points from the favourable fixtures? And that is a very fair point. It's why I said they get 20, to be honest.
Yep. I mean, I don't think they finished roughly where we thought they would finish. So I don't say they overachieved as such. I think, as you say, the key point is going to be, can they keep the band together in terms of their attacking talents? Zaha, you'd anticipate would be leaving. But as you quite rightly say, if they can replace his goals, then they will keep going. Be interesting to see in terms of, just throwing this out of the air, whether Conor Gallagher might be tempted to go back, with a bit of upheaval currently happening at Chelsea, who came 12th in the Premier League this season. As mentioned earlier, both of us had Chelsea top 6, so we didn't see it coming. When we had another go during the course of the season, I had Leicester to come 12th in the mid-season. I had Leicester to come 12th at the start of the season, so I doubled down on that. you, in terms of the preseason prediction, had Brighton 12, and when we did it again, you had Fulham 12. So Chelsea, and they've hired Pochettino during the course of the summer. In terms of, we had the end of Graham Potter when they were booed off and sacked Potter the next day. Little did we know that their season would actually get a lot worse after that when they hired Frank Lampard. I almost feel sorry for him because I think that's the end of his managerial career in the top flight anyway. Absolutely dreadful run of form at the end of the season. Recruitment, you can spend how you can spend that amount of money and get worse and not buy a striker. We mentioned it in terms, and this is a comment, we were just talking about Palace in terms of if they replace Zaha with a striker, then they will be okay. Palace, the amount of money Chelsea have spent, and the most glaring, obvious thing all along was, where's your striker?
Yeah.
I should say nobody is going to have any sympathy for Chelsea apart from Chelsea fans. But in terms of coming 12th, I mean, they have had precedent in terms of when they won the league following season under Mourinho. They had a real bad start to the season and came nowhere in the end reckoning. Is this the start of Chelsea's decline, do you think? Or the fact that they've actually hired a decent manager who will demand that they actually buy a striker? Do you think that will mean that this will just be seen as another blip and that normal service will be resumed next season?
I think that I don't think normal service will be resumed, but I do see them coming 12th as a major blip for them. Todd Bowley, whatever his name is, very much wanted to play Football Manager, didn't he?
Yep.
And got a bit too excited by it all and really should have got in football people. I mean, when you hear the rumours that he hired Frank Lampard on the say-so of James Corden, you start to feel a little bit sorry for Chelsea, then you realise it's Chelsea and you've soon snap yourself out of it. But for me, I think they need to do with Pochettino what they should have done with Potter, and that's give him plenty of time. It's going to take 2 to 3 seasons for Chelsea to get back to where they were. I think they need to sell, you'd say, in excess of 10 players. You're probably looking at more like 15, 20 players with the amount that they've got and the amount of players who won't play very much. You look at a player like Carney Chukwuemeka and you think, mate, you should have listened, and stayed in Brum. But you're right, you've hit the nail on the head with Chelsea, and the fact that the most glaringly obvious thing was that they did not have a striker. The striker that they had, or the 2 strikers that they had, they got rid of in Timo Werner and Romelu Lukaku. And I'm not saying that either of those would set the world alight, but I think that they'd have got them some goals. You've got João Felix, who came in and did okay. Kai Havertz, 75 million on his way to Arsenal. Chelsea should be biting the hand off. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, they've got a striker there and they just haven't played him enough. And he's been shocking when he's played because he hasn't played enough. So Pochettino's got a job to do. I think he's the man to turn them around, but I wouldn't think that it'd be happening next season. Maybe the year after. Not being in Europe's going to be a blessing for him, and it might help him run one of the other cup competitions close or even win it. And that, of course, would be a massive plus for him. I think it'd be quite ironic, actually, if he won a trophy with Chelsea straight away, especially after all his time at Tottenham. But I suppose we'll have to wait till this time next year to really see. But they need a massive overhaul this season, to Chelsea.
Yeah, good hire as manager. The players are there just because they've got so many players. I think he could do something with them, gets a striker in, actually gets some tactical acumen there. You do feel a bit sorry for Graham Potter in terms of, I think he was put in a situation, foisted with players who he didn't really want, didn't really have any say in the transfer business during January. And he was the fool guy, really, when the board decided they didn't want to commit to the project in commas after all. But yeah, they'll be back top half next season, challenging for Europe, especially when as though they're not in Europe this season. So we'll be able to keep players fresher than their rivals. Moving on, 13th in the table at the end of the season was Wolves. At the start of the season, you had Leicester coming 13th. Well, you had Leicester and I had Southampton. So we both failed miserably in terms of that. When we had another go, you had Leeds 13th when we had another go. And I had Palace 13th when we had another go. But Wolves, at the start of the season, I thought they'd come 9th. And you, at the start of the season, had them 11th. For them, job well done. Similar story to a few other clubs. Got a good manager in, changed it round. For them, really, it's does he stay in the summer, the manager? Do they get the money in to buy players? Because talk of Ruben Neves leaving in the summer. Yeah, it's a summer of uncertainty for Wolves, really, because they did well to get to where they did in the table after the start they had. Obviously beat Villa to confirm their Premier League place, but you do get the feeling this could be all for nothing if the manager walks, because yes, in terms of 31 goals scored by Wolves this season, the lowest in the league in terms of goals. I mean, comfortably the lowest. All about that defensive shape, discipline, managerial talent. They've got to keep the manager, haven't they? It's just as simple as that with Wolves.
Definitely. I think they've got to keep him. They've got to rely on getting draws against the teams who they don't expect to get points off, and to nick counter-attacking wins in the games that they really should be winning. They need to find some sort of identity. I don't think it will be the free-flowing football that Wolves would have played before. They'll probably have to go back to that sort of defence-minded style that Nuno had for them, which was likely when they're at their best, really. But the thing for Wolves, for me, is that with Lopetegui apparently staying, apparently all being worked out, and who knows, Fabrizio Romano might be wrong. They just don't have anything really of any substance in their squad. And a manager needs good players to be able to get the results to keep them in the league more than anything else. I mean, I had them to go down in the end, and I don't feel silly about saying that, because it wasn't until right at the end of the season that they managed to confirm their survival. But you look at the Wolves team, and if you take Ruben Neves out, and of course Moutinho's left as well, there's nothing really there to fear. It's a bog standard team that might come top 6 or top 8 in the Championship, in my opinion. And Wolves fans, if I'm upsetting you, I do apologise. I'm not doing it because I'm just a Villa fan. I don't mind Wolves at all, but I do worry for them. And I think that this is a big summer, and they need to get behind Lopetegui. It's just whether they've actually got the money to do so, with all the rumours about their FFP and finances. What about you? Do you think that Wolves will be okay next season, or are you worried about them?
Yeah, big summer for them. Goals are a problem. You know, in terms of football 101, if you don't score goals, you don't win games. And if you don't win games, you don't usually do very well when it comes to the final reckoning in the table. Midfield, as you mentioned, Moutinho, if he goes, he's already gone. Neves, if he goes, then that's massive blow, because they've been the cornerstone of Wolves in the Premier League since they came back. So replacing them will be absolutely key. And if they don't, then yeah, I agree. I think they will be struggling. I don't think they'd come higher than 13th if they lose those players. But, you know, we'll just have to keep an eye on them and see whether they have sufficient recruitment in the summer for you to be able to revise your opinion of Wolves upwards when we do our preview. But onwards and downwards to 14th place in the table. West Ham came 14th at the end. When we did the preseason predictions, you had Bournemouth 14th. So, well, with spoiler alert, you did correctly call that they would stay up. I think I had Everton or Brighton 40. I can't quite tell from my notes, but either one of those was not great in terms of what happened. When we did it again, you doubled down on Bournemouth coming 14th, and I had Leeds 14th when we did it again. So just as bad as I was before. But West Ham, at the start of the season, I had them 7th in the preseason predictions and you had them 9th. So in terms of the season in the league, underachieved and were in danger for a brief moment of relegation, looking over their shoulders. But they won the Conference League, so it doesn't matter, does it? Is it simple as that for Wolves, for West Ham?
I think at the end of the day, the fans will accept the fact that they finished as low as they have because they managed to win the Conference League. And what a way to win it as well, with Jared Bowen scoring that last minute winner. And then obviously he went off to give Danny Dyer a hug as per the song, whichever Danny Dyer that is. I think, though, I can just imagine the West Ham fans at the end of the season going, oh, it's all right, we'll do better next year because we've only got the Premier League to concentrate on because we're not in your, oh, damn it. We're in Europe again. The signings that they made, Paqueta took a little bit longer than they thought for him to find his feet. Agard, of course, got injured at the start of the year. They had the problems with that Pratt who plays at centre back, who was an idiot with his pet, and they just really struggled. And with Declan Rice going, and with Thomas Souček losing a bit of form as well, they will need massive midfield reinforcements. And they've got to get the right sort of players in so that they can push on next year. I think if they have another bad start, that it could be a case of bye-bye David Moyes, which would be a shame for him because he overall, I think the last few seasons West Ham have done incredibly well. They've always been a team that I feared playing because we never do any good against them. What about you? Do you think that West Ham will learn from this season and be able to balance European football and the Premier League a little bit better next year? Or do you see it being much of a muchness again?
Well, I think winning the Conference League means they were kind of obliged to keep David Moyes. Whether that will end up being the right decision for their medium long-term future, time will tell. Losing Declan Rice, if that does happen, which we assume it will at time of recording, means you've lost an England international, one of the best players in the league, and any team who lost a player of that ability are going to be adversely affected, and they are going to be in a similar situation to what Villa were when they lost Jack Grealish. And do you try and replace like for like, or do you use the money to buy 2 or 3 players to try and negate the impact of losing such a key player? They also had the latest instalment of West Ham waste money on a striker with Schumacher. Big money came in from Italy, did absolutely nothing. Looks like they'll be trying to get him out the door as quickly as can. So yeah, a big summer for West Ham. The trophy obviously has galvanised the fan base. Don't begrudge them that. Football is about winning trophies, and not very many teams get the opportunity to do so. So in that regard alone, it goes down as a success. But realistically, I think in the league, they are a few players short to really go back to the days where they were a couple of years ago, where they were coming 6th, 7th, which is I think why we both had them to come as high as we did in our pre-season predictions. But speaking of a team who one of us had high in their pre-season predictions, or higher than perhaps the others did, Bournemouth 15th in the Premier League table at the end of the season. As we mentioned, you had them to stay up. I didn't, as we'll come on to. I, in my pre-season, had either Everton or Brighton going 14th, 15th. You had Everton coming 15th. When we did it again, I had Wolves 15th and you had West Ham 15th. So, to be fair to you, you called Bournemouth to stay up. I didn't. So, I'll give you the floor to revel in your love of all things Bournemouth.
Well, I can understand why people would have thought Bournemouth would go down. I think that the home advantage of having such a small ground, which can be a little bit hostile for them and can play in their favour, as we saw when they played Liverpool at home, was going to be one of the key factors. Don't get me wrong, when O'Neill got appointed permanently and they went on that awful run of form, I did think, oh, my days, these guys are going to drop. But they picked it back round, picked it back round. They've got some sound investment now as well, brought in some players, spent quite a bit of money for them in the transfer window. So it'd be interesting to see how Bournemouth recruit over the summer, especially with the loss of Jefferson Lerma, and to see whether we both feel that they'll stay up next season, or will they be a one-season wonder and end up going south, not to the coast, but to the Championship.
Yes, I mean, I learned nothing about Bournemouth because when we rolled it back, I had them to go down again in the mid-season. So I am not qualified, although I will continue to triple down on Bournemouth, see that they lost their last 4 games of the season. Yeah, I think second season syndrome may be a big thing for them, but we'll leave that to the preview. A prediction I did get right before the start of the season was I predicted Nottingham Forest would stay up at the start of the season, which they did because they came 16th, which is where I had them before the start of the season. I had them coming 16th. You had Leeds coming 16th before the start of the season. When we rolled it back again, I had Everton 16th and you had Everton 16th. So we both had Everton 16th when we rolled it again. For Forest, they did try and saw Chelsea trying to buy a load of players and they thought, no, hold my beer for that. And they brought 85 players during the course of the season, or so it seemed. They signed at least 30, I think. And there was a time during the course of the season where pressure was on the manager. Other clubs we saw who were struggling in the league pushed the button and sacked their managers. Nottingham Forest didn't, kept Cooper in charge, and he got them over the line, finished the season with 4 unbeaten. And their home form kept them up, really. Away, didn't score any goals, didn't really get any points, particularly in the grand scheme of things. It was Fortress, the City ground, and fair play. I predicted them to stay up. I wanted them to stay up. It wasn't a begrudging prediction at the start of the season. Job done. Fair play. Try and roll it around again for next season. I think they'll have to get a few more players in, even though they've brought as many as they have. What are your thoughts on Forest?
First of all, I apologise to Nottingham Forest for putting them 20th at the start of the season. They proved me wrong. I thought there was only room for one Forest in the Premier League, that being me. And I'll be damned if you don't go down next year, you bastards. No, they did really well. They're a team that I want to do well. We have an affinity with them. One player I thought was absolutely exceptional for them and could be an heir to the throne for a bigger team who are losing central midfielders or need them is Morgan Gibbs-White. I thought he was absolutely fantastic. Too much money at the time, probably justified his price tag with the performances that he put in. But let's see how many players Forest bring in the summer and if they can do it all over again. But fair play to you because you had faith in them all along.
Well, I didn't have faith all along because when we did it again, I had them to go down on goal difference. But, in terms of the start of the season, I did. I hope they stay up. And I think it was only a slight wavering of my faith, which unfortunately was the week that we recorded that preview. But I think in terms of Gibbs-White, the flip of the coin for the Chucky Mecca situation we talked about earlier, I think both sets of fans for their former respective clubs, Wolves and Villa, when the offers came in, said, will laugh all the way to the bank, will drive you to the bank to cash these checks in, because it's it's just not worth it based on performances to date. As you say, very good player for Forest. Wolves ended up getting a bigger lump sum payment at the end of the season, I believe, in terms of for staying up. And sometimes it's a situation whereby a transfer can work out well for both sides. I think Wolves felt that they couldn't turn the money down at the time and got a very good fee. And from Forest's perspective, especially during the second half of the season, really kicked on. And you couldn't say on his own he was the difference, but he's certainly, as you mentioned, a player who had potential for a few years, wanted to kind of step up into the next stage of his career, and Forest gave him that opportunity to do so. Although in terms of one prediction we both did get right about Forest, we did have in our worst signing predictions at the start of the season, we both had Lingard. We were both right. Nothing against Lingard personally. At a crossroads in his career now, has to decide whether football is the most important thing to him, or whether he'll step away. But yeah, very good for Forest. Moving on to the first of the non-losers, also known as 17th place in the Premier League table, is where Everton finished. At the start of the season, we both had Brentford in 17th. So we've already remarked that we were way off on that. When we rolled it back, you had Forest 17th and I had West Ham 17th. In terms of Everton, when we rolled it back, I had them 16th and you had them 16th. So we both had them to stay up. I think at the start of the season, we didn't really think they were really going to trouble the upper echelons of the table. Worried about goals, which turned out to be true. Second lowest scorers in the league with 34. Real toxic atmosphere off the field. And there was a real explosion of joy the previous season when they stayed up under Frank Lampard. This time it was just a real kind of almost a side show away from the main feeling of the fan base, which is to get changes in the board and off the field. And for a club that has spent a lot of money over the last few years with not a lot to show for it, Sean Dyche in charge, they stayed up. I think that's about it. You can really say in the positive column for Everton. And do you see any hope for them arising out of their end of season run where they stayed up, or is it a real kind of sense of doom is going to continue to surround Everton?
Well, to answer that question, I think that it's just all doom and gloom really in Everton land, and I hate to say that. We've obviously spoke to Peter of Talking Toffees previously, but it doesn't seem like it's going to get any better for him. Dominic Calvert-Lewin isn't the striker that he was a couple of years ago. He seems to have been a bit of a one-hit wonder. I know he's had injuries, but even when he's been back, it hasn't worked out. The Neil Maupay signing didn't really work out. They started putting Damari Gray up front in the end, and aside from his belting goal against Man City, I don't remember too much of him. And I hate to say that because he's a former Cadbury man, but I don't mind saying it because he's a former Blue Nose. We both expected, I feel, Everton to stay up because of Sean Dyche going in, and when he was when those teams near the bottom of the season, near the bottom end of the league, started to get to that point of the season where they were thinking about sacking their managers, Sean Dyche was always going to be the first one really appointed, and it seemed as though whoever got him would be okay, but they would have to adopt a certain style of play, which is exactly what Everton did. And aside from that freak result away at Brighton, which was a fantastic freak result,
kept them up.
Yeah, it did. It definitely did. They were atrocious. I think they're lucky that they're keeping Decore, but I don't know who would want to join Everton at the moment unless it was maybe a player from the Championship or from outside of England
wanting to come, wanting to show that they can be a very good player in a poor side so that they earn a move the following season. And Everton are one of those historical clubs who have always been up there. We like them because of their traditions and whatnot. They're very similar to the Villa, but I think that they're at the very start of a long and winding downward road, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think unfortunately from an Everton perspective, I think they stayed up because other teams were worse or did stupid things or made gambles that didn't pay off. I don't think they stayed up because of anything particularly they did in terms of, in terms of bringing Sean Dyche in as the firefighter. Yeah, as you mentioned, that was really the only call to make when the Lampard era came crashing down near the end. But yeah, not really not much positivity, and they may end up in a situation where they have a very nice shiny new stadium and it's not hosting Premier League football. But speaking of stadiums which are not going to be hosting Premier League football next season, moves us on to the relegation zone teams, and 18th place was Leicester City, who went down despite winning on the final day with Dean Smith in charge. At the start of the season, you had Southampton in 18th. As we'll come on to, they did go down, so predicted that. I had Leeds in 18th at the start of the season. As we'll come on to, they went down as well. When we rolled it back, you had Wolves in 18th and I had Forest in 18th, so we both really should have stuck with our original predictions there. But in terms of Leicester, at the start of the season, I had them 12th, you had them 13th. So we both thought that they would be comfortable. In terms of goals scored, they scored 51 in the Premier League, which was the highest in the bottom half of the table. And it was the same number of goals that Villa scored. So it certainly wasn't the attack that was the problem, really, for Leicester. 68 goals conceded, which not great. In terms of it was the equal third worst defence or equal fourth worst defence in the league. But the Brendan Rodgers era came to an end at Leicester. Talk of him going back to Celtic. But there's often one team who sleepwalks into a relegation, and it seemed like, from my perspective, that it was Leicester this time around in terms of even when they were down there was almost a feeling, oh no, we're not going to go down. And then by the time they realised, oh shit, we're in a relegation battle, it was almost too late. And I think in terms of, it came down to a couple of moments in games at the end of the season against their rivals, which they couldn't win, Leicester. And Dean Smith will know, fine margins when he was in Villa, at charge of Villa that first season, kept Villa up. Fine margins relegated Leicester this time around. And because of their attacking players, in that sense, they will be, the players won't be missed in the Premier League because they'll probably be coming back to other clubs in the Premier League. But a cautionary tale, really, in terms of they had a ride, won the Premier League and the FA Cup in the last 6-7 years, but transfers not been as plentiful, not been as successful, and very slowly just edged their way to relegation. And I think in terms of, we're just talking about Everton, and I think in terms of, I wouldn't say Leicester were a worse team than Everton, but Everton got the firefighter in at just about the right time, and Leicester didn't. They were self-inflicted errors, perhaps, in terms of Leicester, rather than having one of the worst teams in the league. What are your thoughts on Leicester? Do you think they were a terrible team who deserved to go down, or was it just one of those head-scratching situations that sometimes unfolds in the relegation zone?
I think that you were on the money when you said that there's a team that sleepwalks into the relegation zone and into being relegated, and that's exactly you're right. That's exactly what Leicester have done. And when you look at how Leicester have operated off the pitch with player recruitment over the last couple of years, you could say that you could potentially see this coming. Um, as you rightly mentioned, the attacking options that they've got were very plentiful, weren't they? Harvey Barnes scored a high number of goals for a team that got relegated. James Maddison was always a creative player who you felt could pull the strings for them and could help get them a result. Jamie Vardy has always had the pace to nick a goal, but that didn't happen this season. And Kelechi Iheanacho, well, he'll always score you a winner against the Villa, except for this season at their place. But he's the type of striker who you wouldn't mind having as your first choice, really, if you're in the Premier League and you're mid to lower table. The the main problems they had was that the midfield, central midfield, and the defenders and the goalkeeper just didn't pull their weight. Tielemans got injured for a while. He wasn't as good as he's going to be next year, and obviously we've we've taken a chance on him based upon how well he's done over previous seasons, and you'd hope that he'll be reinvigorated ahead of our European adventure when we play Austria Vienna in the playoff of the Europa Conference League. But they just haven't bought any players who you think, oh, bloody hell, they're going to be good. They'll be fine. I think Leicester, like the Leeds team that went down previously, and like the West Ham team that went down previously, with the likes of Viduka and Joe Cole and that, probably thought that they were a bit too good to go down. But they forgot that Danny Ward was absolutely rubbish in goal for them, and Daniel Everson wasn't really much better. They were they were crap, weren't they? Really, this season, and it's a shame in many ways to see them go down after the fairy tale of Ranieri and the chairman, God rest his soul. But it's not a surprise, and I think that they're going to have a wake up call next season. I don't think it's going to be bounce straight back necessarily. I think that they're going to have a bit of a struggle at least to start with, especially if they have to sell Barnes and Maddison, which you'd think that they would do, though they'll probably be able to command a little bit more than the 50 million that Tottenham have reportedly offered for both of them. Maddison and Barnes, though, both have been rumoured for the Villa. Would you take both or either of them?
I take Barnes. I think he would fit into the squad at Villa very nicely in a position of need. Could well, maybe needs a bit much, but he could play on the kind of that left-hand side. So Barnes, I would. Maddison, a bit of a luxury player, I think, for where Villa are trying to get to. Ability's not in question, but yeah, I'm not convinced that Maddison, that's the right move for Villa based on the way we're trying to play, but certainly both very good players. And in terms of Leicester, their hiring of Enzo Mascherano as their new manager, perhaps an admission that they are going to lose some of their big players and that they've hired a coach, to try and have that something different in terms of maybe organisation, and hoping there's another disciple of the Pep tree and have similar success in the Championship. But yeah, it's a period of upheaval for Leicester that perhaps really won't be fully resolved until after the transfer window is shut, which unfortunately is a month after the season starts from a Leicester perspective. But a team also going through upheaval off the field is the team who came 19th in the final table, Leeds United. In terms of pre-season, we both had Fulham 19th, so we both got that wrong. When we rolled it back for the mid-season, you did predict Leicester to go down in 19th, and I had Bournemouth to go down, and they did not. So for Leeds, I had them going down before the start of the season. You had them in 16th. Fireman Sam didn't get the job done for Leeds. a real proverbial mixed bag. 3 different managers at least, if you're not including the caretakers. 3 different styles. The one thing that was consistent, defense was the worst in the league with 78 conceded, and they scored 48, but which isn't bad, in terms of compared to, more than Palace, more than Chelsea, more than Wolves, more than West Ham, more than Bournemouth, Forest, more than any other team in the bottom half apart from Leicester. It just ended up being an absolute pylon of one poor decision after the other, really. And I think in terms of sometimes you have to take the word of the fans at face value when you don't have as much of a day-to-day knowledge or interest in a club. But for Leeds fans, when Villa played them at home and Villa won 2-1, and they had some chances, Leeds, during that game. But after the game, a lot of Leeds fans will say the interview, I think Jesse Marsh at the time, saying it was the best that Leeds had played that season, was a moment where the fans really turned on the basis that they just lost again in terms of that. So just a real kind of disconnect between the fans and the managers and the style of play that they were trying to. Ultimately, I think they were a team who fell between a number of stools, not really excelling in any. And I suspect, in terms of, we're talking about Leicester, will they struggle in terms of the Championship? New owners potentially coming in at Leeds, I think that's going to be a big impact. They could splash some money in the Championship and try and paper over the cracks, but yeah, I don't think in terms of the players and the style of play that they had during the course of this season, I don't think they're going to be a miss particularly to the Premier League. Is that me being harsh?
No, not at all. There's this like I don't know, an arrogance around Leeds fans, and you can hate me, Leeds fans. I don't really care. Um, there's this arrogance that they feel that they belong in the Premier League, but if you're not playing well enough and you're not putting in the effort and you're not getting the results, then you don't belong in the Premier League. And I'd say the same, and I did say the same about us when we went down. You know, I don't think there'll be a miss based on this season and the end of last season. The Bielsa Leeds, they're a miss. They're a fantastic team. They were exciting to watch. They didn't always win every week, and I really do think, even though it wasn't reflected in my predictions, that Bielsa leaving was really the start of the downfall for Leeds. Patrick Bamford hasn't had a very good season. Selling Rafinha and Calvin Phillips, both of them, and I appreciate that they both wanted to leave because they wanted to join better teams, and they've both been justified. Rafinha's gone on and played quite a part for Barcelona and won the league with them, and Calvin Phillips has gone and kept the bench warm and the physio's company at Manchester City during their treble winning successes. But they just haven't done it. They brought in a couple of players who did well in Nonto and Somerville, but yeah, Leeds were on a path to relegation because of all the chops and changes that they did. They were never settled. Any football fan deserves better than that. They deserve, and football managers as well deserve, the time to try and turn a team round. I think Garcia had it a bit unlucky because 4 games left. You never know if they'd have kept him in. They may have just found a bit of form under him because they'd have been getting used to his style of play. Instead, they brought in Big Sam and Carl Robinson. And, well, Big Sam's come there for a payday. He don't really care, does he? He's got, what, £500,000 for 4 games.
and he's laughing all the way to the chippy at the moment. I think Leeds. I think Leeds could do okay next season in the Championship, providing they don't go and bring in somebody like Robbie Keane as manager, who's never done it before. So we'll see what happens there. But a loss to the Premier League, no, I don't think any of these teams are. If you're not good enough, then you don't deserve to be in the league. At the end of the day, I know it sounds harsh, but yeah, I'm a bit of a C word at times.
I mean, I think for Leeds, seeing Phillips do absolutely nothing at City would have been the proverbial kick in the proverbials, because I think in terms of, from a Villa perspective, obviously we also have form of selling one of our main players to Man City, and Grealish became an integral part of that Man City team, in particular during the season just gone. And when you sell one of your best players to another club and you see them really contributing and achieving success, for me, in terms of Grealish, I don't begrudge him that, because it was ultimately in terms of he left to go and win trophies, play at the highest level, and cement his England place. And that's largely what's happened since he's gone to Man City. So you can't begrudge that. But yeah, for Leeds, selling Phillips and watching him do absolutely nothing whilst your team is struggling is, that's a real kick in the proverbials there, because the money that they got from him obviously wasn't enough to be. They brought some players. I don't think individually you could say all the players were terrible. They had some good players, some good performers, but yeah, it just didn't fit into a system that was able to get those results. And as soon as Marsh left, you got different managers coming in wanting to play different ways, and Big Sam coming in, that ridiculous choice. The players they had were just not set up to play in a Big Sam way, and for 4 games, just ridiculous. So, yeah, the writing was on the wall really at that stage. And for a team where the writing was on the wall before the start of the season, if you listened to Mr. Trinity's pre-season predictions, is the team who came 20th, Southampton, who Mr. Trinity predicted to go down before the start of the season. I had them 13th, which did not happen. I had Bournemouth to come bottom, which did not happen. When we doubled down again during the pre-season, I had seen the error in my ways and had Southampton to come bottom, as Will did at that time. Before the start of the season, really, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the crux of Southampton's season and why you had them to go down and why I was a bit more optimistic, but that optimism was massively misplaced. They brought a lot of young players without Premier League experience, trying to take the average age of the team down and trying to build something a bit different to what they'd had before. You correctly, as it turns out, questioned that method and predicted it would not go very well, and it didn't. I had a bit more faith and was slapped around the face for that. But there was also the end of Huston Hull and the wacky, crazy middle interlude that was Nathan Jones. And then they ended the season with a manager who is not going to be with them next season. So you saw it. So from your perspective, it turned out pretty much exactly how you thought it would.
Mate, in the words of BDI, your 2020 visionary doesn't waste a single day. Look, you've summed it up for me, to be honest with you. It was what I said at the start of the season. It was those youngsters coming in, and you can understand why people predict either way. Like you did, they were good players coming in, or players with a huge amount of potential. I think the thing for me was that you could tell that Bednarek wasn't going to be playing much, and he's not the greatest defender in the world, but he's an experienced head. And the only real experienced player that seemed like they would be playing a fair bit was James Ward-Prowse. I mean, Alex McCarthy was being replaced by Gavin Bazunu, who is massively rated by our Irish villain friends. Dave and Liam wax lyrical over him. Livramento was out for the whole season. Walker Peters, okay, he's a bit more of an experienced head, but he's still only 25. And I was concerned as well that they didn't replace Brozier as a striker because he did very well towards the end of last season. Him and Ward Prowse were probably the two that helped to keep them up that little bit more. You know, they got rid of Nathan Redmond, who's an experienced Premier League player. And you could understand the direction they were trying to go in, but it was too much too soon. They should have been bringing these players in, blooding them as the season went on, sending a couple of the older players in January, but not too many, keeping them around the squad if they needed to. And ultimately, it was always going to, I felt they were always going to crash and burn. What's quite ironic about it all is that these younger players who have been brought in, there's one or two of them that top Premier League teams have said, oh, actually, they're quite good. We'll go and have them now. Thanks for paying this much money for them and developing them. We'll give you some money because we know you need it. We're going down, but we'll have him. Thanks, like Lavia. You know, he's been linked with Chelsea. I think he's linked with Arsenal as well. He's going to be off. A couple of the other ones will be off as well. I think had Hassan Huttel have stayed, that they may have fared a bit better. I think he'd have brought in some older heads where he needed to in the January transfer window. Nathan Jones, I mean, on paper, with how well he'd done at Luton, seemed like a potentially a bit of a maverick appointment, but what a load of codswallop. He was absolutely ridiculous, and his pre or post match interview, whatever it was, with I could have stayed in the valleys and married a nice Welsh girl. He's up there with Eric Cantona and the Seagulls and whatnot. I think the only thing that Southampton can be happy about is that they were the team that stopped Man City from doing the quadruple, because they surprisingly beat them at St Mary's. But my days, Southampton need to right a lot of wrongs when it comes to next year. Am I being harsh? Were they as bad as I'm saying? Were they one of the worst Premier League teams ever, or are they okay because us and Derby were absolutely diabolical previously?
I mean, I was about to say the team who they remind me of is us when we went down, because in terms of, as you mentioned, the players themselves, not some enhance their reputation. It wasn't necessarily the players they brought in were all terrible and rubbish and not fit to play in the Premier League, because as you will know from the players Villa brought in that season, they went down. A lot of them actually went on to have pretty decent careers, you know, in the Premier League and overseas as well. So it wasn't necessarily the players entirely why they struggled. It was, Hussein Hull, getting rid of him, not necessarily the wrong decision, but at the time they hired Nathan Jones, I questioned it at the time. I was not convinced that that was a good hire. I have to admit, I didn't realise it would crash and burn as badly as it did. But sometimes in football, you can spend years building something and it can be pretty much just demolished by one bad decision. And as I say, it was a culminate. They made a decision to go and buy younger players. That didn't work, but the managerial situation really, that just kneecapped their season really. And there's going to be a lot of movement out of Southampton over the summer. Will the nucleus that's left behind be able to do something in the Championship? Possibly. And, also in terms of the parachute payments, they'll have a little bit of money, to play with compared to some of their rivals. But a real just an inevitability for quite a while. And I mean, you called it a fair play, but as you said earlier, ultimately, if you come in the bottom three, you deserve to go down. But there's an element of, I do feel slightly sorry for Southampton in terms of they made a call to go a different direction. the individual player performances didn't necessarily mean that decision was wrong, but just the circumstances which they're all placed in meant that it just never really looked like working, unfortunately. And that is how they came bottom of the table. And in terms of some of our other predictions that we made, just to have a roundup mainly so we can pat ourselves on the back for, I think, a couple we got right and laugh at ourselves for all the others we got wrong, which were more. We mentioned the championship. We had a go at predicting before the start of the season which teams would get promoted from the championship. We both called Burnley to win the league. So that was good on both of our parts. In terms of the other predictions that we had for teams get promoted, we both liked Middlesbrough and Norwich. You'll know that neither of those teams got promoted in the end. But when we did it again, you did call Luton to go up via the playoffs, which is what happened. And I will not go into the cliche about Luton, look at their small ground, how delightfully quaint that is. I will just say I am looking forward to Luton being in the Premier League. They've been on quite a journey. Fair play to the fans for keeping the faith when times were pretty dark, when they were in the conference and, wondering if they'll even get in the Football League again, let alone in the Premier League. So fair play to them. They've also taken themselves off the list of teams who voted for the Premier League but have never played in it, as they were in the top flight the season before the Premier League started and got relegated. I believe Notts County are the only one left in terms of who voted for the Premier League and have never played in it. So we had a go at predicting trophy winners before the start of the season in the FA Cup and the League Cup. We were both completely wrong on those. There was your obligatory pick for Villa in the Carling Cup, I believe, didn't happen. You had Spurs for the FA Cup, didn't happen. I had Spurs for the Carling Cup, didn't happen. And I had Chelsea for the FA Cup, didn't happen. So real bit of a wash that over. Man City and Man United doing the business there. In terms of Golden Glove, you went for Lloris. Didn't quite work out in terms of they did end up with conceding. They ended up conceding 63 goals, Spurs, which was not very good.
I don't even know why I went for him because I think he's been shit for a couple of seasons now. So, well, yeah.
I had Edison, which was my attempt at being sensible. And the winner was David De Gea, who, if you remember from early on in the podcast, we were saying how crap he was. So real in terms of crazy scheme in respect to that. In terms of assists, we both predicted De Bruyne, and I am told that is correct, that he did have the most assists in the Premier League this season. I don't want to double check it in case I'm wrong, but I'm going to take the credit for that because I think we were both right. And then for the Golden Boot, as you mentioned previously, you predicted Haaland. I tried to be too clever and said Son. That didn't work. Although I did say if I was being sensible, I would have gone for Haaland. So next season, will I be sensible next season? Well, you'll just have to wait and see. But I think we've kind of had a comprehensive go through our season predictions past looking at those. Well, is there anything else that you want to throw up before we wrap up the 2022-2023 Premier League season?
The only thing I think I'd say is that no, don't be sensible because being sensible shit. I mean, he'll probably get you right more than anything else. It's been a weird and wonderful Premier League season this year, hasn't it? And it's been great to see the likes of us, Brighton, and Newcastle. I'm going to say, and Newcastle, despite what people can think about their ownership and whatnot, breaking into the top 7 and keeping the likes of Chelsea and Tottenham out of it, even though one or two of them did really self-implode and cause their own problems. To see Leicester and Southampton go down was a massive. Well, Southampton wasn't a massive shock, obviously, but really they were shocks because they were established Premier League teams, and we said many times that
at least 2 established Premier League teams would go down this season. Leeds going down as well. A team that, people tend to say deserve to be a Premier League team if they wrote down the 20 teams that do deserve to be. But ultimately, those 3 teams don't. And do you know what? I think it's only going to get even more crazy and exciting in the Premier League next year.
Well, in terms of where you will be able to keep up to date with all of the crazy events of the Premier League is on our Twitter page at Talk Trinity. And we'll keep you up with the Villa news, reviews, previews, thoughts, absolutely everything that's going on with Villa. We will be bringing to you. You can relive past glories on our YouTube channel. We've got all our ones with the guest ones. We've mentioned a few friends of the show during the course of this episode. If you want to go and check out when we've had them on the show before, go to our YouTube channel. Or if you want the audio version, you can go onto our audio providers, Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google. We are also on FanHub. But even though some of our predictions may have been questionable during the course of the season, one thing that has not been questionable is your support for the podcast and our social media over the course of the season. So thank you very much for listening, liking, subscribing, retweeting, getting involved. We really do appreciate it. It's going to be a frantic season next season with a lot more games, hopefully, in Europe, with Super Unai Emery at the helm for Villa on to bigger and better things. So before I'll pass you over to Mr. Trinity for his final thoughts, to say thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back with you again soon.
Yeah, cheers, Tar. Thank you very much for all the listens, all the downloads. It is much appreciated. In regards to friends of the show, I would like to give a shout out, and I didn't mention this to you before, I do apologise, to Dave Martinez Dance Dave and soon to be Neve Martinez Dance Dave. I'm sure she's taking his second name. They get married this coming Friday, so all the best to you. And at least on the night, you'll have something to do because you can listen to our brilliant end of season Premier League review. And let me give you a spoiler for next season's one. It's going to be Aston Villa who finish top of the league. And just like the Pink fans and the Bruce Springsteen fans who have been down Villa Park this season, this week even, having a sing-song, we're going to have a sing-song. Because we got Super Unai Emery. He knows exactly what we need. We're Concert at the back and Watkins in attack. We're going to win the fucking Premier League.
Well, before Dave gets ideas for his first dance song, I am going to have to, I'm going to have to step into the Will role. I respect the listeners too much, so I will be saying, cheers, Tar. Thank you very much. We'll be back with you again soon.